Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com. The world is being bombarded with a spectacular barrage of climate fake news right now. It's impossible to keep up with the nonsense, but in this video I'm going to cover a few of my favorites. Yesterday, the United Nations Environment Program tweeted, "Climate change is a real and undeniable threat to our entire civilization. The effects are already visible and will be catastrophic unless we take urgent action." This is very similar to what they said nearly 35 years ago. UN predicts disaster if global warming not checked, June 29, 1989. A senior UN environmental official says entire nations could be wiped off the face of the earth by rising sea levels if the global warming trend is not reversed by the year 2000. Coastal flooding and crop failures would create an exodus of eco-refugees, threatening political chaos, said Noel Brown, director of the New York office of the UN Environment Program. He said governments have a 10-year window of opportunity to solve the greenhouse effect before it goes beyond human control. It's impressive how the United Nations can keep recycling the same propaganda decade after decade and century after century. Here's another story I enjoyed. Over 2/3 of Brits support UK's net zero target. That is an interesting statistic given the fact that there's long periods of time when the wind doesn't blow in the United Kingdom. 5 days ago, wind was producing less than 2% of UK energy needs. During July, the UK went for 4 or 5 days in a row with almost no wind. The wind tends to stop blowing in the United Kingdom during the hottest days of summer and during the coldest days of winter. I'm guessing that the pollster didn't mention that net zero would mean most of the country freezing and starving in the dark. He probably also didn't mention that the United Kingdom could drop off the face of the earth and would have no measurable impact on the growth of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which is controlled by China. And here's another great story out of the United Kingdom from Sky News. Scientists have warned that Antarctica is now losing ice so fast that it could flip from being the Earth's refrigerator to its radiator. And they say that melting ice in Antarctica is causing sea level to rise. The Economist says, the rapid loss of Antarctic sea ice brings grim scenarios into view. The extent of newly exposed ocean is the size of Argentina. According to The Economist, this newly exposed ocean has appeared since the end of March. This is an interesting theory given that it is winter in Antarctica and temperatures there are extremely cold. Air temperatures over the ocean around Antarctica generally range from -10 to -30 degrees Celsius. For the entire Antarctic region, temperatures are running almost 3 degrees Celsius below the 1979 to 2000 average. Most people don't believe that ice melts at -30 degrees Celsius, but The Economist says that it is, and the extent of newly exposed ocean is the size of Argentina. What's actually going on is that the growth of ice around Antarctica this winter has been slower than the 1981 to 2010 average. The press wants us to believe that this is a climate emergency, but 9 years ago the ice was at a record high. At the time, the press had two standard stories for explaining this. One is that Antarctic sea ice is irrelevant, and the other was that high levels of Antarctic sea ice were due to global warming and that scientists had predicted it all along. The reality is that the 45-year-long trend for Antarctic winter sea ice is that it's been growing. Every summer, Antarctic sea ice nearly disappears, as shown in this 1976 National Geographic article. And then during the winter, the ice grows back. This year there's been some unusual winds pushing back the ice edge over here and here. But other regions of Antarctica have unusually high sea ice extent. Sea ice concentration around Antarctica in January of this year was just about identical to January 1976. There's nothing unusual or alarming going on with Antarctic sea ice. But the press is trying to create a completely fake story about Antarctica melting, which is based on misinformation and propaganda. Here's another of my favorite recent climate scam stories. Jessica Wildfire showed a picture of a long-dead cactus near the Superstition Mountains east of Phoenix. And she said, "If a cactus can't survive this, neither can you." According to Jessica, Arizona has become too hot for a cactus to survive. But if we look at Jessica's picture a little closer, we can see there's lots and lots of very healthy cactus in the background. Like all living things, cactus grow old and they die. Nobody would claim that a dead tree in the forest was an indication that the forest had become too hot for the trees to survive. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, Maricopa County, Arizona, where Phoenix is located, is the fastest growing county in the United States. Phoenix population has grown very rapidly over the last 70 years due to the widespread availability of air conditioning. If people like Jessica are successful at getting fossil fuels and nuclear power shut down, then there won't be any air conditioning, and Phoenix will definitely become unlivable for most people. Here's another story from 2 days ago, which I'm really enjoying. 1 year ago, Democrats passed their climate scam bill, which they called the Inflation Reduction Act. Penn Wharton said at the time that it would reduce the national debt by about $264 billion. But now they're saying it's going to add $1 trillion to the debt for a net swing of nearly $1.3 trillion out of the federal purse. $1.3 trillion is a pretty significant accounting error, and there's no such thing as a federal purse. They're just stealing the money from taxpayers. Joe Biden said, "Our climate bill wasn't just the most significant investment to fight climate change ever, it will also create millions of new jobs in the clean energy economy." I got a good laugh out of that because him and Barack Obama pulled exactly the same scam 15 years ago. In 2008, Biden and Obama said they were going to create 5 million new jobs by strategically investing $150 billion to build a clean energy future. But those 5 million jobs were never actually created. According to Bloomberg, they only created a few thousand. And essentially all of their fake green energy companies failed. And then the White House hid their green energy failures in order to manipulate the 2010 election. The only difference between Biden's scam from 15 years ago and the one he's doing now is that this one costs about 10 times as much. The failures of Biden's latest scam climate bill are already occurring. Silicon Valley Bank collapsed a few months ago. More than 60% of community solar financing nationwide involves Silicon Valley Bank. Joe Biden has actually been repeating the same scam for almost 40 years. He said during the 2020 campaign that he'd started the whole thing on climate change. He introduced in 1987 what he called game-changing legislation for the climate. And since then, and after dozens of United Nations climate agreements, the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has continued to grow exponentially. Which takes us back to the United Nations where we started. It appears that there's a certain percentage of the population which will allow them to perpetrate the same scam over and over again, decade after decade, and century after century. Toto's been pulling back the curtain on the climate scamsters for the past 15 years. You can visit him, Kyrie, Caesar, Toki, Upala, and the 4 new puppies on the web at realclimatescience.com.